because these not only were coincident with the demarcation and hardening of geopolitical boundaries in of the modern African states, but also more or less challenge their viability today. The strategies of European colonization, the failures of the post-colonial African states today, and subsequent patterns of migration thus can no longer be ignored in debates about national and continental identities in Europe, especially as minorities from former colonies increase, their diverse cultures become part of the continuously morphing idea of Europe. Moreover, the rising popular clamor for securing what a friend has called Fortress Europe as a way to keep out aliens, especially from the so-called Third World, must be seen as a response to the reality of Europe's post-colonial condition. This project thus encourages and did encourage, hopefully, debate about what it means for artists from countries formerly colonized by Europe to be invited to literally impose their artistic will on museums that were largely involved in the history of the making of Europe's most powerful nation. At least that's what the Germans want to believe. Who Knows Tomorrow is thus a critical challenge, a call to sustained examination of the ways the fraught Euro-African political, cultural, and socio-economic encounter in the past, structured as they were by colonial imagination and emblematized by the Berlin-Congo Conference, how these reify, refuse, and complicate the present-day experience that provide the basis for contemplating possible futures of Germany, Europe, and Africa. The location of the individual projects in 4 of the state museums of Berlin is crucial to the idea and goals of this exhibition. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and the subsequent reunification of Germany invariably led to unprecedented reorganization of state museums, but also to unrelenting debates about German subjectivity, collective memory, and history. Whereas the reconstitution of the National Gallery and the consequent accessibility of its archives and collections provoked heated debates in Germany about art and national identity, contemporary African artists, as the work of these 5 participating artists testify, also engage in diverse issues pertinent to Africa's post-colonial experience, not least of which is the place of memory and history in the construction, sublimation, and critique of national and cultural identity. The exhibition thus offered us a unique opportunity, but also for artists, to bring the histories, memories, archives, and ideologies encoded in the museums in Berlin and their German cultural contexts in dialogue, but also in confrontation with their own subjectivities as individual artists and critical commentators, but also as citizens of the African post-colony and the global village. The project, Who Knows Tomorrow, I should add, departs from previous, no doubt important art exhibitions, some of which I had been involved in myself, that use the large group format to inform and educate Europeans about contemporary African art and artists. It announces new modalities of presentation and reception of the work of artists still considered marginal, at least by some in the West, to the narrative of contemporary art, but who have obviously and indeed participated significantly in shaping the field as we know it today. So the 5 projects are imagined as mirrors on history and prisms of the present. A present in which the lives of peoples across the world are deeply entangled by forces of globalization, migration, memory, and history. The artists present installations of compelling visuality, because this was very important to us right from the beginning, that the works, the projects ought to be really spectacular in a sense, to engage this public. But work that would also take the viewer on a journey through the complex history of the Euro-African encounter. As in their other work, they do not so much make political art as engage in a critical poetics of the post-colonial condition. Their individual projects thus reveal different approaches to important, intricate questions posed by what the artist, the historian Paul Zeleza calls, quote, the violence of intimate histories of Africa and Europe. So I'm going to show some images from so these are some of the organizing ideas behind the exhibition. That's the theory. The reality is, of course, what people saw in Berlin, and the jury's out, of course, as far as the extent to which the work matched the rhetoric, that is, of the curators. I think this is where curating, becomes an exciting thing. And I would, talk a little bit about the reception, at least a bit of how the work was received when the show opened in Germany. So let's do this. So the first project by Elanazzi is called Ozone Layer, and it's at the Arte Nacional, which, as some of us might know, was a museum that was constituted in 1873 to celebrate both the Kaiser's birthday. If you're a big shot, you could, have a museum, built to celebrate your birthday, right? So this museum was established ostensibly to celebrate this Kaiser's birthday, but also, and quite importantly and crucially, to serve as a repository of work that the Prussian state imagined were part of the heritage of Prussia. This was before 1871, when the German nation was born. And this is very important, that at the pediment of the museum right there, it says, let me see, to German art, 1871, and it's in gold there. And so the question then, and the intrigue, of course, is that here was this building that was established to hold work that was part of the German heritage, but it was also imagining a German art, a Germany that had just been formed 2 years prior as a nation, which says something about the roles of museums in the national imaginary. Precisely because if this says to German art, what about the sculptures inside that were from Rome, from Crete, from elsewhere? What about the paintings of the Impressionists and so forth that were from France? So what does it mean to declare this museum as dedicated to German art? So this was one of the reasons we selected this museum, because it played an important role in the imagining of the German nation. Shortly before the Prussian king invited his other colleagues from other countries to sit down and divide up the African continent. So as the European nations were consolidating their national identities, They were also, trying to figure out how to divide up this territory that they needed to lay claims on and exploit for economic purposes. So Elanatsui was given this structure, and basically the mandate we gave the artists is this museum. We mostly wanted work done on the outside, on the building. This idea of imposing the artist's will on the structure of the building, not just maybe going inside to hang works. Although this happened in 2 cases, but as you see, for strategic reasons. So Elanatsui came up with this project that he calls Ozone Layer, which builds on his recent sculpture that he makes with liquor bottle caps. That itself has a long history. The liquor was used during the time of slavery to buy slaves. They were used during the colonial period to buy off recalcitrant chiefs and kings and so forth. You give them crates and crates of hot drinks and to win their allegiance and so forth. And it was illegal in those days for Africans to make anything that tasted like gin, hot drinks, right? They had to be imported from Europe, at least so they control the market. So it has all this at the back of it that is laden with colonial history. But he uses this material in a way that is quite incredible, in the sense that the sculptures that he makes out of these materials can be beautiful. If you've seen any of his projects elsewhere, this is a part of the installation, which is so there's the covering there. There's another fragment of it. And has anyone here been to the Arte Nacional before? Yes. Yeah, so you get it, you have a sense of the scale of this structure. It's really monumental. And so he came up with this idea. Yes?
And what, is he building the same kind of sheet? Or?
Yes, I'll show details of it. So he came up with this idea of partially covering the facade of the museum. He had plans to cover it a little bit more than this, but the project actually was the most difficult of all, this particular one, because of the status of this building as UNESCO World Heritage site, the museum island itself. And so to touch the exteriors of the buildings, actually, even the German president couldn't get us, buy us reprieve for this project to happen. He had to take, and this is what's great about, parts of Europe, unlike where I live in the United States, he had to take the intervention of intellectuals, to make representations to the UNESCO and so forth, to vouch for the project, the importance of the project before UNESCO agreed for this project to go on. But also, they had to extract a promise, almost an oath from the National Gallery never to do anything like this again on any of these buildings. So that's why it didn't quite cover up as much as he planned. But so the idea of covering up this facade of this building, that is so laden, with history, with this particular kind of material that it itself has its own fraught histories, was something we were very interested in. But also, when you see, so this is the view from the back, so we had to invent an incredible, mechanical infrastructure to hang this work, because you couldn't drill, you couldn't really do anything to these columns. So they had to find the best and the most sophisticated installer in all of Germany to help devise this framework for without really drilling anything onto the building. So this is a view of the work from the back, and you can see that light, it really allows light to go to pass through. You almost don't even recognize that there's something covering the facade from behind. There's another view of it. I think, this is another view. And when the wind blows, it makes all kinds of sounds, so it has that aural quality to it. This is a detail of it, and you can see the individual bottle caps that have been sewn together as if, it's a woven fabric.
Yeah. Does it like be patterns in it?
Yes. In this particular project, he tried not to create patterns, but most of his work, if you're familiar with it, sort of invoke Ghanaian textile traditions and so forth. But in this particular case, it was as if, and you can see that he turned this is what you see in most of his work, the outer side of the bottle tops. So he works with the colors to make patterns and so forth. But in this project, it's the back of the aluminium elements that he used as the front for the project. So this is a view of it again from the back, and you can see the different names of the gins and whiskeys, Flying Horse, there. That's another view of it. Now, so the other aspect that I needed to mention is that when you see this from a distance, it gives the impression of, the kind of construction when a building is being renovated, you cover it up so they can work on the inside without people seeing what's going on, but also for safety. So it gives the impression that this museum is being either reconstructed or renovated. And that also plays into this idea that maybe it needs a makeover. The way that the museum was imagined as a museum dedicated to German art, when Germany has now become, like most of Europe, a very complicated idea, especially given the influx of people from the former colonies. Maybe these museums that played a role in imagining the nation need to be redone, need to be reimagined. So this idea also was something that was important in the way that El-Anatsui imagined his project. The second one, the second project was at the Hamburger Bahnhof, which is the contemporary art museum of the National Gallery. And as you may know, the National Gallery, is constituted by several independent museums owned by the state. In the United States, the closest into that is the Smithsonian, that has different kinds of museums under the Smithsonian umbrella. So the National Gallery has all these different museums. The Arte Nacional holds, mostly up until 19th century Impressionism work and so forth, and early 20th century as well. Some of the works that were declared degenerate art by, Hitler's regime were held in that museum and still are there. But the Contemporary Art Museum, the Hamburger Bahnhof, used to be a train station. It was is the only major 19th century train station that is still intact, at least physically intact in Germany. And of course, Hamburger is the station from Berlin to Hamburg. People always ask, so if it's in Berlin, why is it called a Hamburger Bahnhof? So the building also now it's close to what used to be the Berlin Wall. And when Germany was divided, during the Cold War, it was in the in the eastern section, although it was sort of understood that it belonged to the west, to the western section. So it was physically in the eastern section, but sort of, administered by the west. Even though by then it has ceased to be a train station. It had become a museum in the early 20th century, a museum for industry and design, and then fell into disuse, basically, with the wars and all of that. So at the end of the Cold War, after 1989, they decided that it should go to the West. It should go to, when the city was unified, they now, started thinking of how to rehabilitate the structure that was neither Western nor Eastern. So it had that, belong in this fuzzy place in the German Cold War history. Unlike the new National Gallery that I'll talk about just briefly. So it was now turned into a contemporary art museum of the National Gallery. And this is where Antonio Ole installed his project and this wing of the museum. So this is the facade. It has this long wing going this way, and then this other wing extending in this direction. This part has galleries and a famous, what is it called, restaurant there. So he installed his project on the outside, but on the inside was Zarina Bimji's project. Zarina Bimji makes, she's a photo artist, and she's made films recently. So we decided it made better sense for her work to be on, on the inside, whereas on the outside is Antonio Ole's work. And the installation that the film that we presented there is a film that she calls Waiting. Zarina is it's difficult to show her films. She's very it's tough, even to have something to show of his video in public. So often what you see are photographs of the work, which is what I'm going to show now. But this is the installation of the film, with the seats and so forth. And Waiting deals with a project she did. Zarina Bimji was born in Uganda of Asian parentage. Her family was expelled in 1972. Along with other Ugandan Asians by the dictatorship of Idi Amin. He expelled all Asian Ugandans in 1972. So they all moved either to England or to Australia, and so forth, back to India. So she has this interesting relationship with Uganda. She's, she fiercely identifies herself as Ugandan, and a lot of her work deals with this trauma, of dispossession, of losing, that nationhood and so forth. She lives in England now, so she went back to Uganda, to factories that were built during the colonial period that have mostly fallen into disuse. And these factories were extractive factories. They only produced raw materials to be shipped back to Europe, which was how the colonial economy was, structured. That these colonies produced only raw materials that would be moved to Europe to be refined and processed, and then sold as finished products back to the colonies. So she did this amazing video of this factory. It's a very detailed view of the factory, so it has this intimate aspect to it, and you hear these mechanical sounds of machines and so forth, but you don't see any human being. So it's a very haunting work. This is sisal processing factory. Sisal is this plant that they refine and process to make ropes for, in the days, shipping yards in Oslo and so forth depended on these factories for sisal, for ropes that shippers use. So these are views, very gorgeous images, of look at this really decrepit environment, but they almost look so beautiful if you forget what actually they are. But also just the absence of the human beings in themselves haunt the image. Where are the people, you ask? So these are images, and you can see cobwebs all over the place. It looks great as a picture, but when you begin to think of what is inside, you see that this is a picture of, decrepitude, of, industries that have fallen into disuse. We should say something about the ways in the post-colonial period these economies basically were decimated because the raw materials ceased to be, they lost control or never had any control of these markets and so forth. So her work deals with this, continued economic relationship between Africa and the West.
Sorry, where did she find the sound material?
Oh, it was sound from this, they are still processing sisal.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's sound from the factories that she recorded, and and sometimes classical music, interspersed with it. So it's sound from the environment, but you hear, like people knocking, but you don't see who is doing that. So it's like, is this a factory? Where are the human beings? And you're sure it's not it's not an automated, system that would justify the absence of human beings, and so forth. So this is Antonio Ole's project on the outside of the wing of the Hamburger Bahnhof. It consists of 4 levels, of shipping containers. And again, shipping containers, as we know, play major roles in international and transnational, commerce. And he created this huge installation, 4 and almost 5 container length. We had to find the biggest crane, one of the biggest cranes in Germany, to install this work, because you couldn't come into the space. If you notice the shape of the containers had to be hauled from the other side of the building, and this is a huge building already itself, so it had to be scaled over to drop these containers into place. So it was a huge, enterprise, just the installation. And of course, he calls it the whole world, transitional geometry, which calls into mind, abstract art, various forms of abstract art, from op art to, abstract expressionism to, and so forth. But at the same time, when you look, this is, during the installation, all the materials he found from the city, and this is how he does his own projects, that this is one of the earlier iterations of this particular kind of work that he's known for, that look like shanty towns, which is how they originated from Southern Africa. But here, all the materials are from Berlin, so, and this is the construction. There are paintings also installed as part of this whole thing. This is another view of it, with oil drums, welded onto it and all that. Now, when you look at the way this physically blocks off the museum space, and when you think of the classical design of the architecture of the museum and this riotous, thing that is blocking it, it sort of calls to mind this fraught question of history and heritage and identity. Especially when Europe always wants to think of its past as, linked to, to Rome and Greece and, all of that. And then you have these multitudes that populate European cities these days, that bring to these cities different cultures, and the tension that, arise from that. So it's this confrontation